excuse me, Aguasasni community of Mohawk, and a passionate activist in Indigenous seed and food sovereignty. She is the director and founder of the Sierra Seeds, an an innovative organic seed stewardship organization focusing on local seed and education, based in Nevada City, California. Rowen is the current national project coordinator and advisor for the Indigenous Seed Keeper Network, which is an initiative of the Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance, a nonprofit organization aimed at leveraging resources to support tribal food sovereignty projects. The mission of the Indigenous Seed Keepers Network is to nourish and assist the growing seed sovereignty movement across Turtle Island. Her passion is in teaching and mentoring, and has developed many curricula which focus on holistic, indigenous, permaculture-based approaches to seed stewardship, in which honors the many layers of seed culture. From practical hands-on skills, cultural context, and memory, with guiding principles that are rooted in an indigenous ecology of relations. She teaches and facilitates creative seed stewardship, immersion around the country within tribal and small farming communities, as well as offering an online distance learning seasonal mentorship called Save Seva. She weaves stories of seeds, food culture, and sacred earth stewardship into her blog, Seed Songs.
All right, so let's take it away, Rowen.
Great. So happy to be here, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let's see here. Present. All right. Can you all see that?
Yeah, it looks great.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Welcome, everybody. Sego Seguego, Ganyat the Hawe Yungyats. So grateful to be here, everybody. My name is Rowen White. I just introduced you in my ancestral language, which is Ganyat Geha. And I introduced myself in my indigenous name, which is Ganyat the Hawe, which means she carries the snow. I'm Snipe Clan from a small community of Mohawk people right on the New York-Canadian border. I'm a Mohawk woman, I'm a seed keeper, I'm a farmer, I'm a mother, and I'm a passionate activist for Indigenous food sovereignty. And I also love to write and share my love for the world through a lot of different avenues. I'm so honored to accept the invitation to offer a keynote today. And today I'll be sharing from my heart about some of the work within our communities, as well as lean into some inquiry with you all around the thoughts of the future of food and the role of radical imagination as we cultivate relational food landscape that perhaps can somehow bring us back into towards cultural sanity again. I know we've been through a rough and rocky last year, and the beginnings of 2021 have also brought a lot of reflections around the cultural insanity of the moment. So before I carry forth with some of the stories and of the work that we do, I'd love to just share a little bit about my hopes for what I could carry to this circle of learning today. My prayer for today's time together is that perhaps we would all walk away feeling more inspired to uncover and infuse and explore our work in agriculture with the beautiful ancestral legacies that we all carry, each and every one of us. That as we collectively work towards beautiful new expressions of what the future of food could be, that perhaps we could together bring our hearts and our minds together to imagine that food landscape as a reflection of the diversity of cultures that we are here in the United States. I know through the past 25 years of working along the seed and food path that in my heart of hearts, cultivating a relational food landscape is absolutely possible and is a more sustainable way to feed and nourish not only the people that we are the communities that we reside in now, but for those yet to come. In this movement, that we're all a part of. There are countless, countless brilliant souls who are making powerful contributions to the changes that we know we need to make in our food and nourishment landscapes. Some are brilliant system thinkers and operations and logistics cartographers. And I like to think of myself as part of the contingent of folks who help tend the heart and the spirit of the movement. Wendell Berry once said, we exploit what we merely value, but we defend what we love. And that is the spirit that I carry into this work, and that I hope through the stories that you hear today, that perhaps you will find a part of yourself stirring in your love for land and food and seed. Ultimately, if I could leave one legacy of my work here on Earth, it would be to inspire a new generation of people to love the earth as mother and to connect with the seeds as relatives once again. A long time ago, as we sit in the circle, I want you to imagine yourself as part of a glorious and beautiful lineage, because a long time ago, all of our ancestors came into agreement with plants and land and animals and all of the elements of our food landscapes. And we all gave up a little bit of our wildness, we as humans, they as plants. And we came together into a beautiful agreement that we would care for each other, and we're bound in that reciprocal relationship. And the seeds, they never forgot that part of their agreement, right? Like for each and every one of you who ate breakfast this morning, those seeds never forgot about you. Like, you have a full belly. But many of us, by either force or choice, we have abdicated our relationship to seeds and to food, and to land and all of these things in this increasingly consolidated food system that we have today. Yet the original agreements that our ancestors made a long, long time ago, they still run in our blood and our bones like wild rivers. Perhaps it's their song inside of you that encouraged you to get involved in farming or agriculture, and what brings you here today. Not one of us listening today is excluded from that legacy and lineage of our ancestors. And many of us are only a couple of generations removed from these deep, deep storied relationships with our food. And so I see many of us in this time living in a diaspora of disconnection from this beautiful storied food landscape. And perhaps some of my words and my stories today will rehydrate some of that memory and rekindle that fire and that desire for you to connect in deeper ways with your food and seed and the work that you do. Let's see. So here's a picture. I'm just going to jump in and start telling stories, because that's what I love to do. You can see myself, my little row self over in the corner here. And man, I was so proud of that little lumpy bumpy pumpkin that I grew in my backyard with my mom. But I've come a long way. And in the last 25 years of doing food and seed work as an adult woman, I really owe a huge debt of gratitude to those ancestors in my lineage whose blood memory and cultural memory has allowed me to tap back into this way of moving in the world. So you can see here a couple of pictures of ancestors of mine. Alex White is the man in the suspenders, the overalls there. And he was a dairyman at Akwesasne in northern New York. And he was really on the cusp. He was of that generation that were taken away to boarding schools, who were indoctrinated and assimilated and acculturated to basically sort of be ashamed of the long lineage of agricultural traditions that we as Mohawk people held and carried. We're an agricultural people, and we have a long, long history of tending the earth in beautiful reciprocal ways. He was a part of that that generation that was taken away, that was taught not to speak our Indigenous language, that was taught how to be more like white people, and was taught the white man's farming. So he raised cattle, he grew oats and peas and all sorts of European crops. The picture in the middle is my grandfather, Lincoln White, who was raised on our family homestead. We still have that in our community at Akwesasne. He was part of 4-H, he raised sheep. But so there's this, but before them, like Alex's mother was part of this beautiful, vibrant agricultural heritage that, against all odds, continued to thrive in Native communities, even in the face of colonization, genocide, loss of life because of disease, etc. And so I think often of those ancestors and relatives who continue to remind me that this path is a good path, and I do it really to honor them. My work in Food and Seed has been a journey to find my way home, to understand more deeply and fully what it means to be a Mohawk woman in the modern era through reconnecting with Food and Seed as a way to find meaning, to find purpose, to find pleasure, to find passion in this world. And I really do credit my journey to find ancestral seeds and to reignite my knowledge of tending and stewarding the earth as really saving my life. Like as a young woman, it's really difficult to sort of live between two worlds, being an Indigenous woman in a society that's consistently echoing back, that we're not good enough as people, that sort of legacy of imposed shame. I put this picture here. This is a gorgeous prism of beautiful tomatoes. And I always like to harken back to my first teachers, those who first taught me. And throughout my time walking along the seed path, I have apprenticed myself not only to elders and farmers and teachers, not only in my Mohawk community, but all across the organic food movement. But ultimately, I also apprenticed myself to the seeds and the plants. And when I was 17 years old, I had the good fortune of leaving my community to go explore what it might be like to live on an organic farm and grow. And I found myself in Western Massachusetts on a small farm associated with the Hampshire College, and a wonderful mentor named Nancy Hansen. She saw my great love for being in the greenhouse and growing seeds. And I had some of that gardening, as you saw in that last picture, in my upbringing, but we were living a very sort of suburban lifestyle. And so I was able to move in the greenhouse to catch that first wondrous awe of seeing the seeds that you plant sprout again. And she entrusted me with tending their heirloom tomato seed project, which was a project that a previous intern and student had implemented on the farm, which was 50 different varieties of heirloom tomato seeds grown in a patch. And I remember very viscerally sitting on this dusty farmhouse floor in New England, sorting through all of these seed packets, looking at seed catalogs to read some of their beautiful storied descriptions. And I had this incredible aha moment of recognizing that, one, tomatoes weren't just round and red, that they came in this beautiful rainbow of colors and textures, but they also had lineage and connection to not only land, but to people, and that seeds had stories, and that there was these beautiful loving relationships between humans and seeds, and this co-evolutionary dance that humans and plants have been moving around in since the dawning of agriculture. I remember reading about seeds that were sewed into vest coat pockets, and as Italian people left Europe and came to America, carrying the flavors of home in a packet of tomato seeds, and then learning that tomatoes weren't originally from Italy, but they were from Mesoamerica, and that indigenous peoples of the Americas had a long storied relationship to them. I opened this door to what has become decades of inquiry that has ignited my passion for the work that I do. But equal to my joy in that moment of discovering, like, oh my gosh, biodiversity and agricultural biodiversity and the cultural dimension of biodiversity, I also had a sense of sadness and grief and longing, because I realized that there was something in my life that I had missed and that hadn't been handed down to me, which was that my people were historically agricultural and traditionally agricultural. But I never received a bundle of ancestral seeds and had relationships to the seeds of my ancestors. So that very moment on that dusty farmhouse floor, I made a commitment to myself that I was going to spend however long it took to begin to uncover the seeds of my ancestors and to find out what were the seeds and varieties that fed my ancestors. And it took me on a long, circuitous 25-year journey and that is still unfurling to this day. And so I really credit the tomatoes for being my first teachers and reminding me that there's so much beauty in uncovering this deep kinship with the plants that nourish us each and every day. And at that moment, I was traveling around to Haudenosaunee Iroquois communities, Mohawk communities, talking with elders, talking with that generation who were so foresighted that amidst so much change, acculturation, assimilation, kept the seeds alive against all odds. I was a young woman who was coming back home to talk to elders who had, for the most part, many of them had thought that the next generation had no interest in farming or agriculture or carrying seeds or learning about this beautiful mycelial tapestry of cultural memory around our seeds. But they had kept them alive because there were visions and there were ceremonies that had told them that we must not forget about the seeds. And so I came home and these elders entrusted me with something incredibly special, which was not only a bundle of corn and beans and squash, but also giving me my life's purpose. And in that, recognizing that seed work is intergenerational work, I came across this quote by Joy Harjo, and she says, "My generation is now the door to memory." And that's why I'm remembering. And it became very clear that in that moment, that if my generation didn't step up to be on that threshold of memory, to carry and steward those seeds and their cultural memory, that this vast generations upon generation cultural inheritance of seed and memory and story could easily become extinct in one generation. And so I made a deep commitment to be one of those people who would be on that threshold of memory and be one who would offer that to my children and in the next generations. As I began to receive these gifts of seed, these ancestral Mohawk seeds, and learn how to tend them, learn how to carry them, I also had elders and mentors who were sharing with me the beautiful storied relationship that we have with these foods. And this picture here by John Thomas is a beautiful representation of our creation story and our cosmovision. You can see the beautiful pregnant woman on the back of the turtle is our original ancestor, Sky Woman, who descended from a place called Sky World. She fell down through a hole in the village and descended into this world that was a vast abyss of water. And carrying in her hands some plants and seeds from that old sky world, came down and landed upon the generous back of a turtle and began to sing the world awake. And that's why we call the North American continent Turtle Island, because it harkens back to our original stories and our cosmovision of why we're here. She began to sing the world awake. And she had a baby in her belly who was her daughter. And soon she birthed her daughter. into this new world that we are also very familiar with now. And the two of these women began to sing the beauty of existence, awake and growing on the back of this benevolent turtle. And soon as her daughter grew into a young woman, she became pregnant with from the west winds. And they began to imagine this beautiful family life here on Turtle Island. As those babies, as she became pregnant, she was pregnant with twins. And as those twins grew in her belly, soon it became time for them to be born. But one of those twins inside of her belly was impatient, and he birthed himself through her armpit, cut out. He had a ridged piece of flint on his head, and he burst out through her armpit, whereas the other twin was birthed naturally. And in so doing, the daughter of our original ancestor laid her body down and was dying. And in her last breath, she said, "From my body, there will come plants that will nourish my children and future generations here on Turtle Island." And from her breast grew the corn, and from her hands grew the beans, and from her belly button grew the squash, and from her legs grew the sunflowers, and from her head grew the sacred tobacco, and from her heart grew the strawberries. And so from death, beautiful life came forward. And so we as Mohawk people, we understand that we are lineal descendants of our traditional seeds, that we are actually related to those particular seeds, and that these stories of understanding our kinship are the foundation for this beautiful kin-centric relational food system that we had for generations upon generations until the colonial forces came to the United States, to America, to Turtle Island. But we've kept the vestige and kept the traditions alive against all odds. So really what I want to dig into today is to be thinking about that each and every one of us, we descend from people who had a cosmovision and a cosmogenealogy of being related to the food and seed plants that nourish us. But many of those stories have been forgotten, or have been erased, or have been thefted from us. And so what does it look like to reimagine a food landscape, a way of nourishing ourselves that has those kinship, those kinship lines and that understanding embedded and woven back in to the food system? So what is it going to take for us to restore our relationships to our cosmologies as we begin to continue to further our work in the restoration of a sustainable food landscape? I've been reading a book recently by Glenn Albrecht called Earth Emotions, and he proposes a very dramatic change from the current human-dominated Anthropocene era to one that will be founded materially, ethically, politically, and spiritually on the revolution in thinking that is very old and ancient, right, of indigenous thinking that will be delivered and melded with contemporary symbiotic science. And he names this period the Symbiocene. And so in my work with indigenous communities, we hold a deep, deep, long relationship to an understanding of what a symbiotic, kin-centric, relational food landscape looks like. And so I'll share some of those stories and invite some inquiry for you to think about how we can begin to bring these ways of being back into our lives and our foodways. This is a little bit of a representation of our ceremonial cycles and how they dovetail with our food system. So as Haudenosaunee people, our food is not compartmentalized from all other aspects of our cultural life. We are currently moving through our midwinter ceremony time right now, which is actually marks the very beginning of our agricultural cycle. So it's the time when seeds are dreaming. It's the time, the dark time. Like if you can imagine the life cycle of plants, the beginning of a plant is not when it sprouts. It's actually when it's in its seed form underneath the earth in the very darkness of winter, right? And so we imagine our ceremonial cycle and our living life cycles in that same way. We actually have seed songs that sing to the seeds in that dark night of the soil. We imagine them when they're sprouting, that they're breaking dawn. So we're moving right now through, we're actually praying for our crops. We're praying for good things to come on the horizon. And as we move through our ceremonial cycles, they're all deeply intrinsically connected to the life cycles of how we nourish ourselves and how we feed ourselves. And so we bring that beautiful, reverent curiosity and gratitude back into our movement for Indigenous food sovereignty, that it's an intrinsic part of how we honor that, you know, we decenter ourselves as humans and we recognize that we are in deep gratitude for all of the things that we receive in our nourishment. And so you can see that this actually moves, it actually moves counterclockwise. And I'll share with you a little bit more why it is that we see our ceremonies and our life cycles moving in that particular way. This is a picture actually of some beans climbing up a sunflower stalk on my farm. But in our tradition as Mohawk people, we dance in our longhouses in the same way that beans dance around corn. So if any of you have ever grown Three Sisters, corn, beans, and squash with corns growing up the corn, or have grown pole beans around a trellis, you'll always notice that the beans always go counterclockwise when they grow. And we as Mohawk people, as Haudenosaunee people, had great reverence for those ancestors that are our seeds, those relatives that are seeds. And so we made our dances and our ceremonies go in the same way that the plants dance around seeds. And I think that in some ways, this is an ever-present reminder that it is possible to have a culture of belonging in our foodways. The culture within agriculture brings the possibility of beauty and innovative creativity in the way that we create new solutions to the challenges that are on our horizon in the food systems. We make this work a pleasure practice that celebrates the innate abundance of the earth instead of creating systems that manufacture scarcity, leaving people hungry and exploited. So Indigenous blood memory and cultural memory infuses our reverence, our beauty, our creativity, the arts. So many of these things are the way that we speak, our languages, the way that we understand the world is all a reflection and kind of a biomimicry of the landscape around us, the wild plants, the agricultural plants. They're all an expression. And so it's my invitation to you all and to the movement to continue to find ways in which we can infuse that beauty into the food landscapes that we are cultivating. For those of you who are unfamiliar, Haudenosaunee or Iroquois people have historically resided in largely New York State and southern Canada, including Ontario and Quebec, although many of our trade routes and kinship routes extended far to the south and north. There was a lot of movement. And so in 1650, this was the original land base of our kind of territories of the Six Nations of the Haudenosaunee, with the Mohawk people being the keepers of the eastern door and the Seneca people being the keepers of the western door. And as you can see, a vast landscape of, of territory that we would have. And so therefore, a lot of space to be able to grow and feed and nourish our people. But as you may know, the American Revolution and the Revolutionary War had a great impact on that particular land base, and colonization and the genocide that ensued has deeply impacted our ability to tend relationships to the earth and feed our people. This is a slide that talks about the genocide that happened at the hands of General Sullivan, who, upon orders from George Washington in 1779, came into New York State and began a campaign of burning down our villages and burning down our cornfields. And the reason why I bring this into focus is that Black, Indigenous, and bodies of culture, we actually live in a post-apocalyptic reality right now. Many of us in this current time of 2020, and there's so many things falling apart. We talk about apocalypse often these days, and it's important for you all to remember, those of you who are of European descent, that on this continent, we actually reside in a post-apocalyptic reality. Like our entire lifeways were completely altered and violently assaulted. But amidst that, against that, all odds, we have kept our traditions and our seeds and our stories alive in the face of that. And we have, and we continue to move against the malignancy of the colonial project to keep these foods and seeds alive. And so these things did happen. I mean, these are the words that General Sullivan said, and you can read them on the screen in front of you, but I'll point out in particular a couple of the sentences. When they're making these orders to go in to destroy and maim our people, they say it will be essential to ruin their crops now in the ground to prevent them from planting more. It says, whence parties should be detached to lay waste to all settlements around with instructions to do it in the most effectual manner, that the country may not be merely overrun, but destroyed. So this was a very manufactured effort to completely sever our connection to the earth and to the land and to our seeds. In fact, in some of the journals of General Sullivan, they laid waste to over 1 million bushels of corn that were being produced pre-industrial, no tractors, no petroleum, no industrial tools. This is human power being able to grow 1 million bushels of corn to feed the countless people of the Confederacy. And so the reason why I bring this into view is to say, against all this, we are not a conquered people, that we continue to move against that motion and continue to plant our seeds and to continue to uphold our traditions. So you can imagine, here's the current land base of Haudenosaunee communities in the 21st century. You can see Akwesasne right over here. That's my home community, and we have many different communities in New York State and Canada. Yeah, just a couple of statistics is that 60% of the land in the United States is owned by private individuals. 30% of that land is owned by the federal government, and comparatively tribal nations only own 2.5% of their land. And so you can imagine what this decrease in land base has done for our ability to feed and nourish our people. But we have kept, good things alive amidst all of that. So I'm going to begin to focus on some of the ways in which our communities have begun to revitalize and work together towards a more abundant future for our children in how we nourish ourselves. Because as tribal people, we cannot be sovereign people unless we feed and nourish ourselves. It's critical. So we are involved in many, many projects with Akwesasne Seed Sanctuary, which is a partnership that is a mutually beneficial relationship between Seed Shed, the Hudson Valley Farm Hub, and members of our home community of Akwesasne. We are working together in a land and seed rematriation project in the Hudson Valley. As you can remember, that the map that showed that huge land base that we used to have, we used to go down towards Hudson Valley, Albany, Syracuse region, and plant our food and seeds in that region, which is an area that's much more conducive to growing agricultural crops. Whereas where our current territory is along the St. Lawrence River, that would have been fishing grounds, hunting grounds, and is not very conducive to growing good food and seed. And so we've partnered with people downstate to be able to have access to land into resources to really, really multiply food and seed. This project started 4 years ago with just a handful of seeds. The corn that you're seeing there, that red corn, was revitalized from one cob of corn by our elder, Steve McCumber. And now through the Seed Sanctuary, we've been able to grow over 5,000 pounds of the red corn throughout different seasons to rematriate back to our home community to feed our children in our schools and in our longhouses. So it's been an incredible partnership. And so again, this is a testament to the beauty of what we can do and the foresightedness of our elders who throughout the generations of acculturation and assimilation have understood that keeping the seeds alive is critical. And I say this often, you know, we cannot, as Indigenous peoples, as people of color, we cannot be defined by our intergenerational trauma of having that blood memory of 500 plus years of colonial violence, but may our movement be animated by the ancestral brilliance that runs in our blood and our bones. And that has been the most heartening part of working in this movement, is to see elders, young people coming together to heal that intergenerational trauma and to allow ourselves to be proud of who we are and where we come from, and that ancestral brilliance that has a huge part to play in reimagining the future of food in a way that is resilient against the impending challenges of climate change and you know, the trappings of capitalism and the things that are failing us in that economic system. So I do want to talk a little bit to this idea of the cultural dimension of biodiversity. Here you see a beautiful slide of all of these different beans here laid out for you. And the spectrum of diversity that exists on Earth is because of the cultural dimensions of biodiversity. Most of the enclaves of diversity that exist on the planet still reside in places where Indigenous culture is more intact. So this connection between relationship to land and to seed is still vital. I often think about why, you know, when I was uncovering this bundle of ancestral seeds, we had 20 plus different corns, all different colors and textures and ways of growing. Why was it that Haudenosaunee people had so many different corns to grow? Oftentimes it was this particular corn was for this ceremony, and like the Hegawa calico corn, multicolored corn was for the children's ceremony, or the red corn was for weddings, or the blue corn was for when you gave your babies their names. You know, there was this association with each one of those corns. And so we knew that diversity becomes culturally encoded. Why? Because our ancestors knew that that diversity is the foundation of our resilience, right? And so they knew that if they culturally encoded it by, you know, making it a part of our ceremonies and our traditions, there was a reason why we had to keep all of these different seeds alive. That was more than just cerebral, right? That it was connected to something deeper, our deeper understanding, that it would safeguard that diversity for generations to come. And so thinking about the ways in which we can begin to culturally encode the value of diversity in our current food system is critical. How we teach our children what they value. A lot of children these days are seeing a monoculture landscape of food. They go into their supermarkets, there's only one type of tomato, one type of corn, one type of zucchini, right? So how do we begin to play that long game of reseeding culture for people to understand the value of diversity, you know, as we begin to move forward? And it is a collective value that we must preserve in our communities if we are going to really thrive as humans on planet Earth as we move forward. And I think that there's no sustainable food movement that can really be truly sustainable if we don't do this work of culturally encoding the value of diversity again. I bring this back to this beautiful picture of of our cosmology. And I just want to introduce perhaps a new word to the lexicon, which is this idea of kin-centric foodways. So again, kin-centric ecology is something that's been deeply explored by Dennis Martinez, as well as Enrique Salmon and some other indigenous ethnobotanists. And kin-centric ecology is the way in which traditional native folks look at our relationship to the environment. It's the same model that we use for our human relatives that we place on nature, plants, animals, the wind, the earth. It's a way that we're decentered. We're not at the center of things. We understand that our ability to thrive and be vibrant cultures on earth is dependent upon the health of all the beings around us. And so I would like for us to begin to think about what does a kin-centric foodway look in the United States? And I often in my work begin to challenge us to think about the need for a new lexicon for relational agriculture. What are the ways in which we can speak about the reclaiming and revitalizing our foodways with words that are able to seed our imaginations of what's possible, instead of imprisoning ourselves to choices, compartments, and pathways that are just recycling this extractive and exploitative and disconnected systems of thought and action. And as somebody who comes from a long lineage of people, like, Mohawk language is beautiful. It's all verbs. It's a very living, dynamic language, and it's all relational at its core. It's all about the ways in which every word is formed and conjugated in terms of how the two entities are related to one another. And so I think if we are bound by the constraints of a lexicon, a way of speaking about what we imagine the future of food is, how are we going to shift in these beautiful ways that we know? I talk about how I always cringe when people say that I'm in food systems work, because I really hate the word food systems. I think it sounds sterile, it sounds reductionist, it sounds hollow. I feel like it was birthed from the same forces that created the destruction of the beautifully storied food cultures themselves. And so I often think about new ways to speak about what we can imagine that new future food is. And that's why I invite us to think about radical imagination and creativity as we begin to imagine and problem solve and create solutions for what our landscape of nourishment will be like. And so I would like for you all, as in the second half of this, I'm going to go through some of the solutions that we've had, but I'm also inviting you all to begin to think about that. What are the words? What are the new ways that we can express ourselves? And maybe there are words that we don't even have in English that are in other languages, indigenous languages, that begin to create this new worldview of the way that we can create kin-centric food systems that aren't just, the beneficiaries aren't just humans. And I think that's a really, really important thing to remember, that in a lot of our industrial food systems, the beneficiaries are solely humans. We need to think about how we can create a food landscape that has many, many beneficiaries and is restorative and regenerative at its core and its nature. So as a part of the work we're doing at Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance, we are working diligently on the restoration of indigenous kinship routes, trade routes, and regenerative economies that align with our values. We are working in community to create greater access to traditional seeds. As you recall, when I went back into my community, we did have seeds, ancestral seeds that were kept alive by elders. But in many Native communities, some of those seeds have been completely lost. I mean, you can imagine if cornfields were burnt down or people were completely removed through the Trail of Tears and in various, the colonial tools that disconnected people from their land, that some of those seeds were lost. But seeds have always loved to travel and always have moved, from hand to hand. And so when settlers first came to Turtle Island, the Native people traded generously with them. And so some of those seeds actually ended up in stewardship, under the stewardship of people who are not Native. And some of those seeds eventually made their way into places like the GRIN, the National Germplasm Seed Bank, into public seed banks like Seed Savers Exchange, universities, museums. And so we're helping to facilitate, this year alone, we helped to facilitate over 25 new varieties going back into Indigenous communities with partnerships with seed banks like Seed Savers Exchange, the Field Museum, University of Michigan, University UW at Madison, and soon forthcoming, our organization is putting forth an action guide and a short video and podcast series to highlight the stories of the seed rematriation movement. You can see here, this is one of our seed rematriations from our work at Seed Savers Exchange. We brought home an ancestral squash to the Taos Pueblo. And I just put this photo in here because you can see the emotion. I mean, this woman, Henrietta, was cradling the squash like a baby. This was incredibly healing, reconciliatory work when the descendants of people who were the colonial forces and settlers leverage their resources to be able to bring these seeds home to Indigenous peoples in ways that are very healing. And so the seed rematriation movement is one of the most treasured things that I feel like I get to be a part of in this work. We're doing a lot of intercultural collaboration, again, part of reseeding the culture of belonging in our foodways. This is a photo of many people you probably admire: Karen Washington, Owen Taylor, Nate Kleiman, Ken Green, Amira, a lot of folks here that I love, Scott Martin. And so we're doing a lot of work. This was taken at the Seed Sanctuary in the Hudson Valley, but we need a diverse culture of agriculture moving towards the possibility of cultural sanity again. So we need voices that are Indigenous and that are Black and brown and who have a blood memory of that cultural sanity again. And so this is an invitation and a call to action to begin to center the voices of Black and brown and Indigenous peoples in this movement, because we have a lot to share about what the future of food might look and taste like. And it does really require this intercultural collaboration, and in and of itself, that is healing. You know, we speak a lot about unity these days, you know, with the new transition in the administration. But I think when we do work together in the earth, there's so much reconciliation that can happen and reparations that can happen. That's very, very beautiful. In our work at Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance, we work very holistically in a seed to table approach. We don't think that seed keeping and seed saving is differentiated from cooking and culinary arts. We tie them together in this very holistic curricula that we're developing, so that people understand that it's all holistically a part of how we nourish ourselves, that we can really enliven this cultural memory from seed to table. We've begun to create listening sessions at the community level. A part of my work and passion is to begin to mentor and uplift the emerging leaders that are coming in the next generation in our communities. And I have a huge commitment to moving beyond the, I think, quite toxic era of leaders as heroes. I think we've put too much on the
I
shoulders
don't
of
think so, because I just logged.
a very few people. And we have, we need to move into an era of leaders as hosts, people who can facilitate conversations that create a collective vision of what the next, what the possibility of food change can be. And so this is a graphic facilitation of a poster from our time at Akwesasne this winter, where we really listened and facilitated a community conversation amongst many people. This was the last event that I did before COVID hit. It was in February. And so we do this a lot and we miss doing these. Now we're doing them virtually, but we're just we're facilitating these conversations at the community level. And that's an exciting part of what we're doing. Another thing that we're doing is we created a seed sovereignty assessment toolkit. And right now we're working with the upper Midwest region in doing Indigenous seed census work. So we're really uncovering what is the state and health of seed in our tribal communities, what seeds exist, who's keeping the seeds, what resources are there, where are the gaps, what is our seed footprint, where do we need to scale up to create greater accessibility to seeds. And with COVID hitting, there's a lot more people who understand the value of growing gardens and food sovereignty. And so a lot more tribal people wanted to grow gardens, and we realized that there was a lot of shortages in terms of accessibility to seeds. So we are rebuilding these intertribal seed kinship routes and food kinship routes. So this is a representation of we have this intertribal region, like for instance, the Upper Midwest. We have tribal communities, both rural and urban, and then we have families who are revitalizing this in their homes and within their clans. And so this is a very integrated effort to restore those kinship routes. We've launched a regional Indigenous seed cooperative, which really invests in this regenerative economic model that aligns with our cultural values. Robin Wall Kimmerer shared, she said, we've surrendered our values to an economic system that actively harms what we love. And so as we begin to move with greater intricacy in creating a foundation for food sovereignty in Indigenous communities, we need to invest in economic models that are actually cooperative and align with our values. I think in this time, we've been so heavily indoctrinated into this capitalist system that it's hard to even imagine something different, because we've been so deeply conditioned. I think I say often, sometimes people think it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. And so we're in an active practice to go back and look at the ways in which our ancestors had cooperative economies and work them together with new technologies and capacities in the modern time to come up with some regenerative economic models that will give us some good movement forward. We're doing a lot of seed distribution to help get seeds back into the hands of people. And in so doing, in mentorship and education, we are keeping the cultural context of evolutionary services alive and restoring the food commons. So there's just a lot of inspiring work happening on the ground here. And so these last few slides are just showing us that seeds are a reflection of the people. These are some of my elders and mentors who've helped immensely in this work. This is the Haudenosaunee Seed Keeper Society in our longhouse. Such beautiful, vibrant faces. This work is intergenerational work. We do not own these seeds, we borrow them from our children. They're an intergenerational legacy. And so as we carry the seeds, it's our responsibility to teach the next generation on how to care for them and how to grow them in good ways and how to be proud of who we are. And so these are some of my mentors, Steve McCumber, Dave and Mary Arquette, Pete Jemison, there's my daughter Maisie. Like, this is a whole beautiful intergenerational legacy of keeping this alive. And in closing, I mean, I think just remembering that the Indigenous resilience, just the power of that. This is a slide on my left-hand side of the screen of an old plate from an old ethnographer who had collected seeds in around the turn of, it was 1900. And then this is a picture of the diversity of seeds that exist in our community today. And so against all odds, it's been an incredible, there's been some incredible adversities in the last several centuries, but we've kept our seeds alive amongst all that. And so the last few slides here, I'll just say that there's, the call to action is to how can we practice radical imagination in our foodways revitalization? How can we begin to carry our nations with the same love that we carry our children? How can that be a central tenet, that we love the earth and we love our children, we love our seeds as relatives? How can we begin to infuse that back into the way that we grow food? I guess I'm flipping the script a little bit. Usually we do Q&A, but I'm actually asking you all to, and these are sort of some prompts that I would like for you to think about as you walk away from this keynote. I want you to think about How do we envision the Indigenous role in the larger seed and food commons and coordinate collaborative efforts to care for our seeds in ways that is in right relationship with Indigenous cosmology? And I want you guys to think about this one a lot. I want you to think hard and maybe journal about it or talk with your community about it. What if the ways in which the largely white-led, organic, regenerative agricultural movement, in the way that they respond to the crisis, is part of the crisis, right? I want us to think about the ways in which the organic ag movement might be actually a part of the crisis that we're experiencing. And what role does radical imagination and blood memory of Indigenous, Black, and Brown people contribute to the resprouting of food landscapes that are rooted in cultural diversity? And lastly, what if it wasn't solely technology that was going to save us, but restoring relationships, intercultural relationships, beautiful relationships? And so how can we cultivate new narratives that allow us to relate to land and food and water that have sustained us for millennia? And so I'll just leave this here. How can you support us in our movement? You can donate. You can look into the Land Back movement. You can look into ways you can plug into rematriation work. You can share resources, and you can share the mic. And especially for white folks in the audience, if you have an opportunity to share, where can you share the mic to Black, Indigenous, people of color, to begin to articulate our vision of what the future of food is? You can find us on our website, which is nativefoodalliance.org. And you can also find us on Instagram, my own personal account, and then also our Native Food Alliance website, our Instagram. So I really, really thank you all for listening. In the end, what I would like to do is just have us bring our hearts and our minds together and think about the ways in which your time here was a prayer to honor the grand lineage of seed keepers who came before us. All of those people who came before us, who did magnificent, beautiful work in relating to the land and water and seeds. And in this moment now, may we make renewed commitment for those yet to come to be good future ancestors and to be responsible descendants. And all of us have a role to play in that, every single one of us. So thank you.
Thank you, Rowan. So jam-packed with intention and beauty and wonder, and I think you're in very good company. That most of us here, I'm pretty sure, we all feel this common denominator of earth and environment is that's what we are using to connect the community. And you know, I can't say thank you enough for what you brought to us. I do have a couple questions. These that came up. This one's kind of interesting because when you brought up the yearly cycle, 4 directions, which obviously as Celtic folk, it's almost the same structured pattern. It's based on, you know, the equinoxes, the solstices. So Tammy here says she's very honored to receive your words, your stories, your inspiration, Rowan. Would you be able to share more detail on the ceremonial aspects in relation to the slide of months and seasons?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just in the short amount of time we have, we are always, as Indigenous peoples, we're always kind of thinking about the future. So the ceremonies are not like when we have seed ceremony, we have it kind of before planting, because when you're in seed ceremony, you're actually praying for the courage inside of the, you know, to give courage to the little heart inside of every seed, so that when it comes time to sprout, that they feel invigorated by the prayers that we've put in. And so all along the way, whether we have like the thunders is a time when we honor the thunders, because they actually, when the spring rains come and the lightning comes, it reinvigorates the earth. And so it gives us an ability to plant seeds again. And so there's all kinds of ceremonies along that cycle, whether it's the seed ceremony or planting ceremony or the green corn or the harvest. It's a way in which we are continuing to, I guess, just cultivate that reverent curiosity and that gratitude. It's a gratitude practice in a lot of ways. So there's a lot to go. I'm actually writing a couple of books right now, so I will be going. There's certain things that we can't share with the wider public, but there are aspects of sort of that, those ways of being that can be shared in certain ways. So if that helps.
Another question that came in is, how do we get people to see the value of diverse foods when they may not have access?
Yeah, great. I mean, I think in some ways, our senses are amazing. Like we used to go, we would go do farmers markets and we would bring a table full of like, corns and beans and all the colors, and not a single person could walk by that booth and not be like completely just enamored and just like the excitement, and again, I think it rehydrates something really old in us, this like deep-seated love for diversity. Also taste, like the ways in which our taste and all of our senses, our smells, the ways in which you can get that into schools and get people to see like, oh my gosh, does blue corn taste different than white corn? Or, all the ways in which we can rehydrate and use our senses to reinvigorate people's enthusiasm for that. And again, I think that kind of literacy, seed literacy and literacy for diversity, I think starts out young. So how can we begin to work with our children, with the school systems, within families to cultivate that literacy and to get people access, because I didn't have access to like a diversity of different tomatoes when I was young. I mostly ate canned tomatoes. So how do we get those foods and seeds to young people for them to have that enthusiasm for that diversity? Would be my answer.
Great. Well, and I don't know if you're looking at the chat, but you're getting blasted with thank yous and beautiful, wonderful. So I think you've done a wonderful, wonderful job today, and we thank you for everything you brought and for expanding many folks' minds on multiple levels. Not a lot of people remember or acknowledge the negative sides of colonialism. I think nowadays where more and more people are starting to recognize the impact. It wasn't all a happy, hey, we came over, we found new land, there were people here, but that we'll save that for a whole nother discussion, because that opens a whole bunch more. But thank you very much for bringing it all to the table.
Yeah, and I see a few things in the chat. I'm happy to, I think I've already shared the slide deck with the organizers. I know some people were interested in like the questions that were at the end and that sort of call to action. So maybe there's some way in which we can get those questions to participants, so that people, if people want to do some more exploration themselves or in their communities, that they would have access to that. I'm happy to do that, and I will probably also post them on my Instagram. So if people follow me there, there'll be some things there as well.
So I think everybody, if you didn't see, her Instagram was just plain and simple Rowen White.
Easy enough.
Easy to find. So.
Yeah, I share a lot of my love for the world there. So
good.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks again for
hosting. Thank you, Rowen.
Thank you.
Yeah,
all right. So we are going to prepare you all for our lunch break, but there's something else that had come up. For those of you who aren't already, you can change your Zoom's view style. So if you are in, I think if you're on a phone, you might have very limited ability